over the dark night. She reached up to the sky of stars and caught the red-hot light of the North Star.
Good afternoon and welcome back. President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin have agreed to a limited energy and infrastructure ceasefire in Ukraine, making a deal in a lengthy call after more than 3 years of battle. What does this mean going forward? Peter Baker from MSNBC says this is nothing. Let's connect some dots and find out.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.
Welcome to the Connecting the Dots podcast with Dr. Wilmer Leon, and I am Wilmer Leon. Here's the point. We have a tendency to view current events as though they take place in a vacuum, failing to understand the broader historic context in which most events take place. During each episode, my guests and I have probing and in-depth provocative discussions that connect the dots between these events and the broader historic context in which they take place, thus enabling you to better understand and analyze the events that impact the global village in which we live. On today's episode, the issue before us is Russia has agreed to a limited energy and infrastructure ceasefire in Ukraine as part of a U.S.-led initiative to end the Russia so-called invasion of Ukraine. What does this mean going forward? Let's talk with my guest. He's an American living in Crimea. He's an analyst, filmmaker, and documentarian, Regis Tremblay. As always, Regis, welcome back.
Oh, thank you, Wilmer. It's always great to be with you.
So what I'd like to do here is read the U.S. readout from the call, and then we can pick it up from there. And folks, this is a slightly long read, so please bear with me. The U.S. readout is today, President Trump and President Putin spoke about the need for peace and a ceasefire in the Ukraine war. Both leaders agreed this conflict needs to end with a lasting peace. They also stressed the need for improved bilateral relations between the U.S. and Russia. The blood and treasure that Ukraine and Russia have been spilling in this war would be better spent on the needs of their people. This conflict should never have started and should have been ended long ago with sincere and good faith peace efforts. The leaders agree that the movement to peace will begin with an energy and infrastructure ceasefire, as well as technical negotiations on implementation of a maritime ceasefire in the Black Sea, full ceasefire, and permanent peace. These negotiations will begin immediately in the Middle East. The leaders spoke broadly about Middle East as a region of potential cooperation to prevent future conflicts. They further discussed the need to stop proliferation of strategic weapons and will engage with others to ensure the broadest possible application. The two leaders shared the view that Iran should never be in a position to destroy Israel. The two leaders agreed that a future with an improved bilateral relationship between the U.S. and Russia has huge upside, and this includes enormous economic deals and geopolitical stability when peace has been achieved. Regis, I know that there is also a Russian readout. Your thoughts on what just transpired between Presidents Putin and Biden and Trump?
I didn't really expect anything really amazing, astounding, significant to come out of this. I think, to me, the most important thing is that the two countries are now in direct contact.
Mhm.
You know, it happened with the first phone call that Trump made. It happened with Marco Rubio's phone call to Lavrov, the meetings in Riyadh and Jeddah. If this is all that happened out of the rapprochement that's happened between the United States and Russia, and primarily coming first from the United States, I would be happy as a clam that the two countries are talking. I've said it a couple of times. For me, this represents a giant step backwards from nuclear annihilation, because we were ever so close. Now, in terms of what came out of it, nothing really new. Russia has already made it very clear that they have some specific demands. There are some details that are really significant that Russia expects to be not only discussed, but acted upon. Now, a couple of those things are really significant. Russia is demanding a complete cessation of foreign military aid and intel with Ukraine. Complete cessation.
Mm-hmm.
And that means just the United States, because all of the EU, really all of it, have been contributing weapons and money, intelligence to Ukraine. So I think that is going to be a huge stumbling block, because from what I understand and what I read from the EU, you've got Keir Starmer, the prime minister in the UK. You've got Macron in France. Both of these guys are warmongers. They are talking about sending 20, 30,000 troops on the ground to Ukraine. They're talking about another 800,000 euros that they are trying to gather now to beef up their own militaries and send more aid to Ukraine. Now, I don't think these guys are going to agree to that. I mean, what do you think just on this point, Wilmer?
I think they're going to have to agree to it. I think they're going to be brought into it kicking and screaming. But at the end of the day, I don't see that NATO / the EU has the ability or has demonstrated up to this point the willingness to materially challenge the United States. And so I think they're going to, it almost might be the good cop, bad cop act. And whether they're acting or not, we could discuss. But I don't think that Starmer, I don't think that that anybody in leadership in Europe really has the backbone to go this alone. So over the weeks to come, I think we're going to see a change in their position.
Yeah, boy, right now they're beating the drums for war.
Mm-hmm.
All of them. This Kaja Kallas, who's their kind of like foreign minister type of person. Even the new German, I forget what his name is, that's going to replace Olaf Scholz.
Mm-hmm.
He's another warmonger. They're talking about rebuilding their military capacity independent of the United States. Now, I'm not sure, Leon, that I believe this is just bluster, because what I've been reading from the media here and from Europe is that they're really concerned that Trump doesn't like them, that Trump has been threatening to pull out of NATO or not defending them if they get themselves in trouble over this Article 5. Trump doesn't have much respect or like for the EU, these unelected bureaucrats who are the ones that are creating and implementing all of the policies, military, financial, economic, cultural, everything that's happening across the EU. And so I think these guys are really scared. I think Macron especially is probably more afraid than anybody else, and he's trying to appear as the one who is going to be the leader, the spokesperson for this new emerging EU without the United States. But he's going to be opposed by Poland. Poland also, from what I understand, has the largest standing army in NATO, and NATO is positioning itself to be a really good ally of the United States. So I see this as being really, really not only complex, but very complicated because of the propaganda that the EU is emitting that's directed at their populations. Your thoughts?
Well, I think, first of all, you mentioned who is replacing Schultz, and I always think of I Love Lucy. It's Fred Mertz. Friedrich Mertz is because that they were the neighbors of the Ricardos and I Love Lucy, so that's how I always remember Fred Mertz. I can't disagree with anything you're saying. I just add to your analysis the difference between the rhetoric and the reality. And the EU, they don't, from what I can discern, and NATO, they don't really have a large enough standing army to confront Russia. And so, because in fact, I was just talking with Scott Ritter yesterday, and Scott was looking at the numbers and saying he was talking about the United States, but I think this would translate over to the EU as well. He said they would need 700,000 troops if they wanted to confront Russia. That this would take 700,000 troops, and they just don't have the horsepower. So I think they'll do a lot of blustering. I think they'll do a lot of complaining. They may even do a lot of threatening. But and it also takes me back to a couple of years ago when Macron went and met with Putin. You remember that meeting where they were sitting at that very, very, very long table? They were sitting at opposite ends of that table.
Yes.
And I recall Putin saying to Macron, and I don't think I have this wrong. He said to Macron, if you allow France to get too involved in this conflict, I will send a missile into Paris. And when Putin said that, Macron looked like somebody had just pooped in his soup. He looked at him like, oh man, no, please. Let's not have that conversation.
Yeah. And go
ahead.
Go ahead.
No, that's it.
In terms of Putin, and that was a threat, really, a warning to Macron about a missile will come to Paris. Putin has said it all along. If any of you directly enter this, and they really have, but he's been so patient because they fired their long-range missiles into Russia on several occasions. They have assisted Ukraine with the intel and the guidance for their drones and missiles that are striking really quite deep into Russia. And just this past week, several attempts, hundreds of drones, and 70 or 80 that were targeting Moscow. Putin has warned them, and he's got a couple of missiles. This Rezhnik is an incredibly powerful missile that they demonstrated once as a sign, not to Ukraine, as a sign to anybody in the EU that this is what we have. Plus, we have the Iskander. We have several other missiles that they haven't even talked about that would completely destroy places like Paris, like Brussels, like Berlin, like London, like Denmark. So Russia has that capacity, and the Europeans have to know it. They have to know that's not a threat. Certainly the Pentagon knows that it's real. The other thing that you mentioned about Scott Ritter, now I'm not a military analyst. I don't know how many guys it would take for a standing army to be able to confront Russia, but Russia's got over 1 million, I think it's 1,300,000 men already trained, and not all of them are deployed along the front lines, but they've been able to relieve all along the front line these guys that have been fighting. They haven't been fighting there for 2 years. They're relieved on a really consistent basis, so they're fresh. I don't think, however, that there's going to be another World War III ground war like World War I and World War II. I think if things get really bad and Russia is really threatened, Putin has promised, okay, that he's taken off the gloves, and they will use everything in their power to protect the motherland. And so with what Scott Ritter said about the standing army, and the Europeans don't have it, they also don't have the manufacturing capacity now,
Right.
not only to arm Ukraine, but even for their own self-defense, because they're so depleted, and they can't buy it from America because America is depleted as well and can't produce it fast enough. And so I think the threat of a war between Europe and Russia is minimal. I was always afraid of a nuclear confrontation, but that was primarily between the United States and Russia because of America's involvement, tens of thousands of troops in all those bases all across Western and Eastern Europe. The chance for just a mistake could have triggered a nuclear war. So I don't think that's going to happen. I hope that you're right, that Trump will coerce all of Europe, all of NATO, to follow his instructions and to get on board. I would be really happy to see that happen.
Well, let me change that. Make a couple points. One, another element to this, which is why I don't think that the EU will jump in here, is during the Ukraine conflict, there was always the next wonder weapon that was going to be sent into the conflict. At one point, it was, oh man, when those Leopard tanks get in here from Germany, oh my goodness, that's surely going to turn the tide in favor of Ukraine. And Germany now has no more Leopards left because they've all been blown up on the battlefield. When those F-16s come in, well, those all got shot down or they got blown up on the runway while they were sitting there in the hangars. Every time there was supposed to be a new wonder weapon coming from one of the EU countries, that wonder weapon was no wonder. And also, I don't know. I want to be real clear on this point. I don't know if Trump is going to force the EU to capitulate as much as his just saying to them, the U.S. isn't in it anymore. If you want to do this, you're going to have to do it on your own. And when that reality sinks in to Macron and Fred Mertz and the rest of the crew, that's when I think they're going to look at each other and say, well, I guess we got to find something else to fight about because this one ain't going to work.
Yeah. I have to get back to another one of Russia's demands, which I think will impact all of Europe, west to east. And that's the root cause of this conflict. And Putin and Lavrov have repeated this endlessly. And I'm not sure if your viewers and my viewers on my shows are really aware of what these root causes are. And as you know, Wilmer, it goes all the way back to 1991.
Mm-hmm.
The promise to James Baker, the then Secretary of State, to Mikhail Gorbachev, that NATO would not move 1 inch east.
Correct.
And beginning with Bill Clinton, NATO has moved all along Russia's borders. And they're still trying to get NATO into Georgia. They're still, that was the whole point about Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
Putin could not allow that to happen. And so what Putin is saying to Trump, and this is the second meeting that they've had over the phone, you have to take and consider the root cause. And Trump acknowledged that. He actually acknowledged that this conflict goes back quite a ways. He didn't provide a lot of details, if any, but he basically acknowledged that this is really all about Russia's basic security interest.
And
It's
even
all
Marco
Russia.
Rubio has articulated that.
Yes. So I hope that this becomes one of the conditions, objectives, goals that the Trump administration might have, because that's where it starts. And the thing about it is that this isn't just about Russia's national security interest. It's about the Eurasian, European, and Asian security. From west to east in Europe, they're all afraid that Russia is going to want to invade them. It wants to create a new Soviet Union, which is totally ridiculous. Russia doesn't have the intention, doesn't have the ability, doesn't have the manpower, doesn't have the money to invade anybody. And so I think this could be an extremely important topic that if Trump and Marco Rubio and whoever else is in their circle of influence realize that what we're really talking about here is the security of all of Western, Eastern Europe, and what we call Eurasia, because Russia is also part of Central or Western Asia. I'm really hopeful that they will focus on this and that Putin will keep their focus and their attention on this.
Kevin Baptiste, thank you so much for that super sticker. Greatly appreciated. And I hope I was able to acknowledge you before you actually, before you had to get out. Regis, there are a couple of points in this U.S. readout that I would like to touch on and get your reaction to. First of all, and again, folks, this is the readout of the call coming from the White House. The first point is Zelensky was not involved in the conversation. But they talk about, both leaders agree about a lasting peace and the need for improved bilateral relations. So those things tell me that both Trump and Putin are looking to the future, that they're not merely wrapped up in the needs of the moment. Your thoughts on that point, Regis?
I'm going to rewind, Wilmer. I want to go back to July 2018, the actual love fest between Trump and Putin when they met in Helsinki.
Mm-hmm.
And they had all kinds of wonderful things to say about bilateral relations, working together with your team, our team, on many different levels to restore good relations between our countries. What actually happened is Trump got on his plane, and already people like Lindsey Graham, John McCain, and others were calling Trump treasonous. They were saying he was Putin's poodle.
Mm-hmm.
And before you knew it, Trump had rotated 180 degrees. Now, here we are in 2025. Basically, Putin and Trump, at Trump's initiative, you've got to give the guy credit for that.
Mm-hmm.
The two guys are talking about the same things they were talking about in 2018 to restore these diplomatic bilateral relations. Forget about the lasting peace. I mean, I want to see peace in Ukraine, okay, but I don't think it's going to come about diplomatically anytime too soon. Let me say that. I hope that what we're seeing, and I said that in my first comment, the thing that makes me so hopeful is just the restoration of these bilateral relations.
Mm-hmm.
If that's all that came of this, I'd be thrilled. Secondarily, I certainly would like to see progress made in a diplomatic way to end the conflict in Ukraine, but I think it's going to end on the battlefield, and I think Russia is going to terminate it, and there isn't going to be any deal making or anything like that.
Oh, it's going to be surrender. If I could just jump in, into that point, what I think Donald Trump, with Marco Rubio in his ear and whatever the guy's name, Whitberg, whatever the other negotiator's guy's name is, I think they are trying to figure out a way to get out of this mess and not have to admit defeat. And because I think that Trump is looking at the reality on the battlefield, especially with Trump having asked Putin, please don't slaughter those 15,000 Ukrainians that you have surrounded. Can you do me this favor, Vladimir? Can you just not vaporize those guys? Can you do me that favor? And Putin's response, sure, tell them to put down their weapons and we'll treat them humanely. So I think Trump is trying to find an quote unquote honorable way out of this without having to admit defeat, when actually this is going to be surrender.
You know, Trump said he was going to end it the first day in office.
Right.
He was going to make this deal, and it hasn't happened. Wilmer, I think this is already Donald Trump's war. He's trying to present himself as a mediator, but a couple of weeks ago, he said, we're going to temporarily halt the intel sharing and the shipment of arms to Ukraine. 2 or 3 days later, he said, no, we're sending this stuff in. To me, he lost any credibility as an independent peacemaker, mediator, in my opinion. I think Trump, I don't know if I want to say he's walked into a trap that may have been set, not by Russia, but by the UK. Nevertheless, he's in a position right now when he can lose not only credibility and political capital, but a devastating defeat. If there is a surrender, it won't just be Ukraine surrendering, it's going to be NATO and the United States. And then this is going to be part of Trump's legacy. That, you know what? If he can get out of this and walk away, I'm not sure if he can. But one way or another, if there is a complete surrender, that doesn't just mean Ukraine, it means the United States and the EU. I think Trump's in a really difficult spot.
Oh, I agree. I agree with you 1,000%. If I can just try to be more succinct, he's trying to figure out how to spin it. That's all.
Yeah.
No, I think he's very clear in realizing the reality. This is over. And I think Putin is saying to him, hey, man, how much further do you want me to go?
Yeah.
Because I'll go as far as I have to go because I've already won this. And I think Donald Trump is saying to himself, how do we spin it? Look, we lost in Vietnam. We lost in Afghanistan. We haven't, the last thing we won was Panama. And,
or
and,
Haiti.
And actually, we didn't win Panama because we didn't capture Noriega. Noriega, if everybody remembers, he went to the Catholic Church and held out in the church, and I think he surrendered to the Vatican. But anyway, so I think Trump is trying, and I use Trump more of a U.S. as the kind of U.S. umbrella. I think he's trying to find a way to spin this thing so that he doesn't have to cry uncle. Let me go back to another point here that they made. This never should have started. It should have ended long ago. So this issue with the peace will begin with energy and infrastructure ceasefire. Because I don't think a lot of people realize that the energy and infrastructure attack was a strategic approach by Russia. They spent an awful lot of time attacking infrastructure, and especially early on, sparing population centers and attacking infrastructure. Your thoughts, Regis?
Yeah, Russia has been consistent since day one to avoid as much civilian infrastructure and casualties as possible.
Mm-hmm.
They have been striking, at least for the last year or 6 months for sure, nightly, daily, with drones, with missiles of all types, energy infrastructure. But Russia says infrastructure that is supportive of Ukraine's military production capability. So from what I read, it's been a little bit more than that. Recently I read a report the last couple of days. I haven't seen the Russian Ministry of Defense publish anything about it, but supposedly Kiev was hit with many missiles, and it was to take out command centers, underground command centers. And it's also been reported that other parts of Ukraine that are supportive of this military manufacturing production capability have also been hit. So you have to know it's affected the civilian energy as well. I've heard reports that there are blackouts where people have electricity only 80% of the day. I can't personally confirm that, but I've read that. Mm-hmm. And I've read reports that come from within Ukraine that this is so. So I think what really is behind this, in terms of where Russia is coming from, Ukraine has been indiscriminately targeting civilian infrastructure, mm-hmm. targeting civilian residences, targeting that music hall. I mean, that wasn't a missile, but that was an FSB planned attack. They have been attacking the nuclear power plant, which is now shut down in Zaporozhye. And the OSC and the International Atomic Energy Administration have had observers there the whole long time. And they said, well, yeah, there's missiles coming in, but we really are not sure where they're coming from. Well, give me a break. Why would Russia want to blow up its nuclear power plant? And so I think this was probably one of Russia's demands. Cease the attack on energy and infrastructure, not only in Russia, but I think Russia, given a ceasefire, and if this was one of the things that was agreed to, Russia would stop attacking energy and infrastructure in Ukraine if any kind of a ceasefire could actually be accomplished.
The negotiations will begin immediately in the Middle East, and they spoke broadly about the Middle East as a region of potential cooperation, and Iran should never be in a position to destroy Israel. That the involvement of the negotiations taking place in the Middle East, that to me is incredibly interesting. And then why would they throw Iran and the status of Iran and Israel into this conversation?
I'm glad they're talking about it. I'm sure you're aware that both Russia and China have been supportive of Iran.
Mm-hmm.
Both Russia and China have told the United States to back off bombing Yemen, the Houthis.
Mm-hmm.
Russia has been extremely careful in condemning Netanyahu and Israel. Almost complete silence from this side. I can say you almost never see something on RT, Sputnik, or in TASS about Russia condemning the genocide that's taking place with the wholehearted financial and military support of Israel. I think what Russia and China want to do in terms of influencing the dynamics in the Middle East, but especially in terms of Iran, they do not want to see Iran develop a nuclear weapon.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I know the United States obviously doesn't want them to develop a nuclear weapon, but they don't trust them. And I think Russia and China having the influence that they have with Iran to help them develop their domestic, non-military nuclear infrastructure can be a real guarantee to the United States, but also to Israel, that Iran will not ever have a nuclear missile. That's what I think is going on. I don't know if their conversation has anything to do with what's happening in Palestine or Gaza. I certainly haven't seen anything coming from Russia or China or anybody else outside of that region condemning what Israel is doing. I think it's a good thing that they've had the discussion about Iran, because I do think Russia and China can certainly calm that whole discussion down.
Here's the problem I see. Yes, they can calm the discussion down, but Israel wants to annihilate Iran, and I don't see. So let me set it up this way. On one side of the equation, I see China, Iran, and Russia trying to work out peaceful coexistence with Israel. On the other side of the equation, I see Israel wanting to annihilate Iran the same way they want to annihilate Hamas. And so how do you negotiate with an entity whose focus is annihilation? Not peaceful coexistence, but annihilation. Am I wrong on the way that I'm describing the Iranian, the Israeli position?
No, I think you're absolutely right. That famous video of General Wesley Clark when he went back to the Pentagon and he talked to a general who used to work for him, and he was told that the United States is going to attack 7 countries in the Middle East. Iran is number 7. Iraq, Libya, Lebanon, Syria. This has been the plan all along. And it's not the United States that needs that. It's Israel that needed all of those countries broken up, defeated, attacked, so as not to be a threat. Arab countries, all Arab countries. So, I can't say that I focused a great deal on what's happening in the Middle East, because living in Russia, what we're concerned with on a daily basis is what's happening right next door, and not right next door, But actually, fortunately, we here in Yalta have not been under any attack, but other parts of Crimea have been under attack. I crossed the bridge at Kerch. It was almost a month ago now, and we were ready to come across the bridge, and the sirens went off, and traffic was stopped. Trains were stopped for 2 or 3 hours because of a air raid alert. Nothing happened, but we're living with that here in Crimea. So I'm aware of what's happening in the Middle East, and I'm aware of the protest, pro-Palestinian protest in the United States. But I will end on this thought. Donald Trump proclaimed he wanted to be remembered as the peace president. Well, I don't know how he can claim to be the peace president when he's supporting Israel to the tune of billions of dollars in weapons to commit genocide, how he just had the United States military, again, attack Yemen, incredible bombardments. Peace president? I don't think so.
Well, that's a great point. That's a great point. Because he could. This is a circumstance where he could actually do two things at the same time, and both would facilitate each other. He could bring an end to the Ukraine conflict. He could also bring an end to the Israeli conflict. But the Israel issue, there's a whole lot more support for Israel in the United States than there is for Ukraine. For as much support as there is for Ukraine, once you start messing with AIPAC, you're messing with a whole different type animal. But to your point, if Donald Trump were sincere in his points, he could bring, put it this way, he could bring an end to the conflict in Israel a whole lot faster than he can bring an end to the conflict in Ukraine.
I agree with you. Yeah, absolutely. I want to say one more thing about Trump, because looking at the United States and looking at Trump since he's taken office, there isn't a day goes by when Trump doesn't come out with some kind of a really outlandish comment, some tremendous boast, some tremendous new thing that we're doing, and it's never been happened before and ever in history. And then another day or two, he'll contradict himself. And what it seems like to me is Trump is trying to dominate the 24/7 news cycle. He's certainly doing it in terms of the United States. And I have to tell you, there's not a day that goes by where there's not a headline in RT or Sputnik, the English-speaking Russian media here. So I want to look at this from the perspective of the Russians again. I think they see somebody who's really erratic. I think they see somebody who's really boastful, who is contradictory. He contradicts himself. I think they see Trump as somebody who lies. And I would tell you this, in spite of all the nice pleasantries and the good progress made to reestablish bilateral relations, I don't think Putin or Russia trust Trump as far as they can throw him.
Oh, I think I agree with you 1,000%. And let me ask you this, because you've read the Russian readout, which is more extensive than what I've gotten as it relates to the Russian readout. Is there anything in the Russian readout that you've seen that supports what you've just said?
No, nothing directly, but all of the conditions that Russia has placed on this peace and ceasefire indicate they're not going to trust the United States or Zelensky because of Minsk 1, Minsk 2,
Yes.
and Istanbul.
I agree with you.
You know, you talk about getting snake bit. I mean, it's 3 times, and Russia is not going to let that happen again. And I think when you look at what Russia is saying from its side in these conversations about peace in Ukraine, the nuances, the details, the devil is in the details. Russia is basically saying, you know what? We don't have any trust. They're saying that. We don't have any trust in you, but you know what? For us to go along with this, you're going to have to do this, 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 and this, and make sure that Ukraine does not try to force and script 18-year-olds, that Ukraine stops receiving any kind of assistance and intelligence. That says to me, Russia doesn't have any trust whatsoever this time in overtures made about peace in Ukraine.
You are absolutely right. And one of the key, or a few of the key missing elements in the Western analysis of this readout that I've heard up to this point is they keep talking about the demands that Russia is putting on this process. But what they don't talk about, they don't put it in any context. They don't talk about Minsk. They don't talk about what was the other? There was Minsk, and you just mentioned the other one.
Istanbul. It was an agreement.
They don't talk about Minsk. They don't talk about Istanbul. They don't talk about the former chancellor of Germany saying we lied. We never intended for this to work.
Yeah, no, it was Angela Merkel.
Angela Merkel.
Francois Hollande of France,
yes,
who were guarantors of Minsk, and Poroshenko himself.
Correct.
All of them admitted it was just a scam to give Ukraine and NATO a time to rebuild and get ready.
So, in fact, let me go back to this point, because this is the quote I heard today from Peter Baker, who's an MSNBC's a journalist and an analyst. He said, all of this is nothing. He said, when you look at the conditions that Putin is putting on this conversation, all of this means nothing. And you can't trust Putin. Well, there's an awful lot of context that is missing, Peter Baker, that you aren't articulating, Peter Baker, that you know better than I. If you're half as good as your job, you got this huge contract at MSNBC, you should know these things, and you should be telling the audience these things, because this is what analysis is all about. It's context. Connecting some dots, Peter Baker. You might want to try that, because what you're doing right now is lying to people, not by commission, but by omission. Regis Tremblay.
Yeah, well, you're talking about the media and the influence that it has on people. And I think Trump is still not a fan of the media, but you know what? He commands their attention, and they're reporting in headlines and in content things that he's saying, things that he's doing. I'm glad I live here, because I don't have to listen to or watch any of the mainstream media back in the States. It's been quite a relief, really. But I want to point out one more thing. Mm-hmm. It was in the Russian readout, and I'm going to read it. I have it on another screen here. Both leaders expressed mutual interest in normalizing bilateral relations. We already talked about that. But recognizing the shared responsibility of Russia and the United States in ensuring global security and stability. In this context, they explored various areas for potential cooperation, including discussions on mutually beneficial economic and energy partnerships. That's an area where we could see some concrete action and results.
Okay. And explain why.
Well, as somebody who's living here in Russia, anybody, expat or even Russians, would love to see beneficial economic partnerships. I'm reading today in RT that there's about 500 companies that want to get back into Russia.
Mm-hmm.
And the United States Chamber of Commerce, as well as the Russian Chamber of Commerce, are saying both sides have been hurt so bad economically because of the sanctions that drove hundreds of American and Western countries out of Russia.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, living here, and for the Russian people, they would love to see this happen. Energy partnerships. Look, Trump knows that Russia has a really, it's not infinite, but it's almost unlimited supply of natural resources: gas, oil, coal, water, rare earth minerals. And you've got Russia's 1,000 or whatever it is kilometer coastline in the Arctic, which everybody is now lusting after because of its untapped resources. Trump, I think, realizes that. He realizes where the money is. And I don't think Trump wants to see American companies be hurt anymore. And so in terms of economic and energy partnerships, that's something that maybe Trump and Putin and their people, respective people, could work out deals very quickly to restore that.
You know, another element that was in the Russian readout, but not in the U.S. readout, was Putin suggesting to Trump that they have some hockey games between the Russian teams and the American teams, and some might look at that and dismiss it as irrelevant, but those are the small kinds of diplomatic forays that can actually turn into positive outcomes.
Well, I'm a big hockey fan. Growing up in the state of Maine, I started playing hockey when I was about 5, and I quit when I was 50 because I was playing with guys that were 25, 30 years old, just got out of colleges in the United States where they played hockey, and I was tired of looking at the backs of their jerseys. But I followed it. And, you know, the Russians love hockey. Mm-hmm. And Alexander Ovechkin is about to break Wayne Gretzky's all-time scoring record.
Right.
The attention...
In fact, he should do it in another week or so.
Yeah. The attention on hockey in Russia and in the United States right now, because of Ovechkin, is extremely high. I think most Americans who are hockey fans and live in any NHL city all have Russian players who are stars.
Mm-hmm.
And what your point was, to resume sports, cultural endeavors, which have been completely canceled,
mm-hmm.
would be a great thing. But realistically, I don't know how they would do this. Competition between the Russian Hockey League, the KHL, and the NHL, they're not very close. The NHL is far superior to, while they're great stars in Russia, there's been over 500 that have gone to America. What I would love to see, and you know, if Trump really wants peace and he wants to restore relations with Russia, tell the Olympic Committee, tell the other international bodies, stop discriminating against Russia and Russian athletes. Okay? If he really wants to be the peace guy, bring Russia back into the international community at all levels.
But see, I think this is the foray to that. Or this is the intro to that, is if you start having Russian American competition, I think that you're not too far away from that, whether that demand is public or whether that demand is made through private channels. That's how I see President Putin getting there.
Yeah, I would love to see it happen. I really would. By the way, I think one of your fans here that posted something that Putin plays hockey.
Mm-hmm.
He plays somewhat regularly, but they do let him score, and he's kind of a bender. It's not something he did his entire life. He's had people like Slava Fetisov, one of the Russian greats, kind of help him and assist him, but he's an athlete. He loves the sport. He loves all sport, actually. And gosh, I don't speak now as an American, but just a person who loves sports, that it should never have been politicized to
Correct.
the degree that it has been in the last 4 years. I think it's disgraceful. Anyway,
and to your point, if you're going to politicize it, then be equal in your ire, and Israel should be banned from all international competition. Point, end of sentence, end of paragraph, full stop. And I don't need to elaborate. Two other things I'd like for you to touch on quickly, if you would. Two other stories around this issue that I think require clarity. One, Trump terminates program tracking mass abductions of Ukrainian children. The Trump administration has terminated a U.S.-funded initiative that documents alleged war crimes by Russia, including a sensitive database detailing the mass deportation of Ukrainian children. Because that is nothing but BS. It is propaganda. I think I know the realities behind this, but I'd like for you, Regis Tremblay, to take a shot at this conversation.
Yeah, well, it's alleged that Ukraine is well known for child trafficking, organ trafficking. It's been proven many times in the past, the lies that Ukraine has been telling in terms of these abducted children. I've been to Donetsk and Lugansk, and I visited orphanages that are there. And these are all children that are victims of war. And they didn't just come from Lugansk and Donetsk. Russia has been taking these children that are basically orphaned or have been separated from their families, getting them out of the conflict zone, the war zone, and putting them into either families or wonderful institutions where they're cared for incredibly. And I just read this week that Russia has been being able to place some of these children back with their parents or with relatives. And so this is the fact. The Ukraine is known as one of the most corrupt countries in the entire world. Even the United States people will say that. Okay, the government people, they know it. USAID, they all know it. And Russia, and I can tell you this, the Russian people are very humane people, a very religious people. They're a people who respect not only their elders, but their children. You see these support systems everywhere. And for me to hear these lies about Russia abducting kids, it's exactly the opposite. I've said many times, anything you hear coming out of the mouths of Ukrainian, Zelensky, any of the rest of them, or coming out of Western propaganda, it's a categorical lie. 180-degree lie, opposite.
And all I can add to it is, A, you're absolutely right. And what I've been hearing ever since these bogus stories broke is that Russia has been protecting children, not kidnapping children, and has been reuniting children with their families wherever possible. And that's come from multiple sources. And one of the things that's interesting to read when you read these stories from the Western press, they never cite their sources. They're always unnamed, and they never provide you any data. They never provide you any evidence. Similar to attacking the women's hospitals and all that other type of BS that they like to, the propaganda, the lies, the disinformation that they like to tell. The other one is, and I talked about this with Scott yesterday, but I just saw this today. North Korean troops key to Russian advances in Kursk, says Ukraine. Russia's heavy use of North Korean troops and equipment to retake nearly all of the Kursk region after 7 months of Ukraine control demonstrated the Kremlin's desire to reclaim the land at any cost and prevent Kyiv from forcing a territorial exchange. And you are much closer to this than I, but if you could shed some light on these stories about North Koreans being used in the Russian military.
Well, my wife would be very upset if I answered with a profanity here, but the presence of North Korean troops in this special military operation is hogwash. There has never been one bit of proof that I've read, and coming from the Russian military, the military defense, Ministry of Defense, from any of the Russian publications, from any of the bloggers, not one mention that there's any North Korean troops there. And you'd have to ask the question, why would Russia bring in North Koreans? Well, they don't need them. They've got a standing army of over 1,300,000 men and women who are well trained and who
speak Russian
and kicking, you know what, right now, and have been in Ukraine.
And they speak Russian. They're not North Korean, so there's no language problem.
Yeah, you know who? Well, anyway, that's enough said on that. I think that's pure BS.
Well, and the reason that I wanted to highlight both of those stories to wrap up this conversation is because I think we're going to see over the next few weeks, as these negotiations continue to work their way out, there's going to be a whole lot more propaganda on the Western side, anti-Russia, pro-Ukraine. Most of it will be from unnamed sources, and it'll be BS as the West tries to pressure Trump into a different path or position than he's taking now. And that's why I want to try my best on this show, as well as my Sirius XM radio show, to continue to tell people the truth.
Yeah, well, that's been my mission. I came to Russia in 2016 to find out for myself the truth about Russia and the Russian people. I came back 2 more times before actually moving here 5 years ago in 2020. And my entire focus at this stage in my life has been to try to show American people and people in other countries the truth about Russia and the Russian people. And the basic message is this, Wilmer: Russia is not and has never been your enemy.
What Russia has been, and has been for generations, is anti-imperialist. And I had this conversation with Dr. Radhika Desai, and when I made this point to her, she said, Wilmer, you just hit the nail on the head. This whole conflict between the United States and Russia is imperialism versus anti-imperialism. And China is the same way. And that's been at the crux of these conflicts since there have been these conflicts.
Yeah. I'd like to end on a positive note, if I could.
Sure.
We're talking about the conversation that Trump had with Putin just a couple of hours ago. The most important thing that's come out of that is the reestablishment of direct diplomatic relations, the reopening of embassies and consulates. I said it at the beginning. and I'll end with it now. This has been the most concrete, positive outcome of the talks that Trump initiated with Putin. It wasn't Putin getting on his knees and begging, oh, Donald, please, let's get back together. It was Trump. It was the United States, which I think made a big impression on the Kremlin and the Russian people. I think the entire world ought to step back, take a deep breath, and let out a sigh of relief that right now we're not currently under nuclear threat, nuclear hostage. To me, sitting here in Russia as an American, as a person that's traveled the world, I am so happy and so relieved that this has happened.
And to that point, let me add another element for people to consider, because I've been reading articles as we've been watching Donald Trump wreak havoc on the American Constitution. There are a lot of people that are writing articles and making comments about Kamala Harris saying, well, if she had been elected, this would not be, that there would be this attack on the Constitution, which is a very good point to make. But the other side of that reality that people must understand is if she had been elected, we'd be looking at nuclear war. That she would have doubled down on the Joe Biden foolish plan, thinking that this was a winnable conflict, and we would be heading deeper down that nuclear rabbit hole than coming out of that, away from that nuclear rabbit hole, as you mentioned at the front end. So, folks, it is what it is. Regis Tremblay, as always, thank you. You gave us time late tonight. Greatly, greatly appreciate it, as always, Regis, and look forward to having you back.
Thank you, Wilmer. Always a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you, sir.
Keep up the great work. You're doing a fantastic job.
Well, it's because of guests like you that enable me to do it. So thank you. I really appreciate it, Regis. Folks, thank you all so much for listening to the Connecting the Dots podcast with me, Dr. Wilmer Leon. We are at 600,000. We're trying our best by the end of this week, folks, to get to 700,000 viewers, 700,000 subscribers. And we need you to help us do that. If each of you could reach out to three guests of yours, ask them to reach out to three to subscribe to the show. It'll take us a very long way towards meeting what we need to meet in order to keep this up. Stay tuned. New episode tomorrow. Misty Winston will be my guest tomorrow. Please follow, subscribe, leave a review, share the show. Follow us on social media. All the links are below in the show description. And remember that this is where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge, because talk without analysis is just chatter, and we don't chatter here on Connecting the Dots. See y'all tomorrow. Until then, I am Dr. Wilmer Leon. Have a wonderful remainder of your day. Peace. I'm out.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.